History is put together by these lives of the people as they live them, and you get a chance to do that. We are going to talk about the various areas. I'll take walks with you, or you'll take walks with me if we can, various places. I'm going to try and talk about the north here as well. Let's take a look. Just the first place we're going to start is, I'm sure many of you have waited for the Lewis in front of Wynn's Hotel. And you know about Wynn's Hotel. You know that was the first meeting place of those who put together the volunteers and coming upon. But you stood there and you looked waited for the Lewis. You looked across the street and there's Madigan's Pub. Or maybe you waited in Madigan's Pub. I probably would have. When you do that, it wasn't Madigan's Pub. It was the Reserve Printing Office of the Irish Times at the time of 1916. And into that building, George Plunkett led the volunteers. They took the printing rolls out, they put those up, and that's the very first barricade. And that's the kind of thing I'm going to talk about tonight, is the thing that you walk by every day and you can maybe say, this is the place where the very first barricade was. Now, paper and rolls, paper and books, it doesn't burn. It'll char, but it won't burn. But when the artillery hit it and blew it to smithereens, that paper contributed greatly to the fires of the area, and it was actually that paper going across the barricade that allowed the fire to move from side to side. So as you're standing there waiting for the Lewis, you're standing on a very, very important spot of Irish history, and you do that. And I think that we have to take a look at the time of Dublin a little bit as well. Whenever I'm in Dublin, I always take public transport whenever I can, or when I can con somebody giving me a ride. But I take that public transport all the time, and I'm sure you do too. So if I would have gotten here, for example, by getting off at Pearse Street or Tara Street, as I very often do, I would have walked from here, and the first thing I would have walked by was the Pearse house. And in the Pearse house, he was born there, as was Willie born there. And in fact, it's still there. You can take a look, and very often they will have seminars or lectures there. They have the plaques up on top of the two individuals, and it still says, Pearse Monuments, Pearson's sons, and it's actually misnomered because only one of his sons, Willie, was a carver as he was. But let's talk just for 1 second about Pearse and his personality. He was very shy, he was very introverted, he was a workaholic before that term had ever been even invented. He loved to speak, but he was very, very absent-minded. He was supposed to be the best man at Thomas and Muriel MacDonagh's wedding. He forgot to show up. But MacDonagh still loved him, said of him that he loved to speechify. He said he only started St. Enda's because he could speechify. But he spoke in such a very way that would be very distinctive. It was very slow, it was very distinct, it was very emotional, but he had to really keep his emotions under control. So when he said his most famous words, the fools, the fools, the fools, they have left us our Fenian dead. And while Ireland holds those graves, Ireland unfree shall never be at peace. They had to be said very, very slowly, because all of his life he struggled with a stutter. Now he had it under control at that time, but he had to be very careful in speaking, particularly emotionally. He had to be very careful in the way he said those words. Now he did practice his speeches. I have never heard them. I have never heard anyone who has. But we've seen pictures at St. Enda's of those old Victrola kind of things with the big horn, and you may have seen them, the round waxed cylinders that you record your speech on. He did that, and we know that they existed at one time. So you continue your walk, and you go to what was the fire station then, is still a fire station now. It's also part of the Trinity Capitol Hotel. Has that red tower right there on the corner of what was then Great Brunswick Street, Pearse Street, and Tara Street. Look at the tower. From that tower, the British took up small artillery pieces and machine guns, and that's what did the great damage to Liberty Hall. They had artillery also in Tara Street, and they did it there. We always hear about the Helga, and the Helga was there, and the Helga fired rounds rather. Fired about 24 rounds actually. A few of them over toward Boland's Wills. They fired at Liberty Hall. The first two hit the bridge, but they got their aim right a little bit. But you'll hear people say they lobbed shells over the bridge. No, they didn't. They couldn't. Long-term or long-range naval guns have a very small ability to this. They're firing long range. They cannot fire like a mortar. They fired beneath the bridge and the railway bridge. That's what they did. So they did not do the damage to Liberty Hall that some of the other weapons did. Okay? Now, if you continue around the corner, go to the Garda station there at the corner of Townsend Street. We talked before a little bit about some of the apparent and some of the more subtle discriminatory aspects. That was the very station into which Ned Roy led Michael Collins to see his file. But if you take a look at that building, take a look at the doorways. On the western doorway, you'll see an officer with a peaked cap, a carving of their face on both sides of the doorways. That was where the British could go into it. They were all officers. If you take a look at the eastern door, you'll see a Dublin Metropolitan policeman with a hard felt helmet. They were Irish. That's the door they went into. And that's the subtle class distinction. It was always there, no matter what anybody would think about that. Okay, now we get here and we're around a corner, and not very, very far from here, you'll have Gardiner Street. Gardiner Street was the home of Marley O'Reilly. You know the name? You know, Terry has her on the plaque outside. She was the one who raised the flag over Liberty Hall on the week before the Rising. Now, a couple weeks before that, she had been dancing there at a ceilidh, and in fact, she had broken a window, and when James Connolly called her in, she thought she was in trouble. But in fact, what he did is he said, I want you to raise this flag over Liberty Hall, and so she did. And when he handed her the flag, he said, I hand you this flag as the sacred emblem of Ireland's unconquered soul. She was the one who raised the flag. She was the one who was very involved in Liberty Hall, the soup kitchens, etc. She had a little better life than some of the people in this particular area, and she knew it. So she had a great social conscience. And she came down here often during the lockout, rather, and she was very good. And then during the Rising, she was in front of Liberty Hall, falling with the rest of the Irish Citizen Army, and her mother came and grabbed her. Her mother said, come home, and Molly said, no, Mother, you go home and take care of the children. I have business to do for Mr. Connolly. She did. She went, she became a dispatch runner. She was at City Hall, back and forth to GPO. It was Molly O'Reilly who brought the word of Sean Connolly's death, who was the first one to die in the Rising. But it was also Molly O'Reilly who brought the word of Sean O'Reilly's death, who was the second one to die over there. He was second in command after Sean Connolly, and he also lived on Gardiner Street. Almost a neighbor. And they probably ran past each other many, many times in those times. Okay, so now we're here, and you might have come here from Connolly Station. You might have just come right across the street. And you probably wondered, as I have almost every time I've gone to Connolly Station, why didn't they try to take this? Would have made so much more sense. Why didn't they take Kingsbridge Station? Probably the countermanding order more than anything else. But again, they really didn't plan very much from anything coming from this eastern end. O'Connell Street, Sackville Street as it was then, was pretty much the area where they stopped. They didn't think anything would come here. Very poor planning as well. But if you came here and you're walking up and down Amiens Street, you take a look and you think, what's here now? Right down the street here, you've got the North Star Hotel. Still there. It was there at the time. It was a big meeting place, as was this. On Spy Wednesday, Padraig Pearse met Michael Collivett there, who was up from Limerick. And by this time, Michael Collivett's coming up. There are all these little rumors about a rising. Are these maneuvers on Sunday something more than just maneuvers? And so they were down there and they were talking about this. And Pearse was trying to tell them yes, it was or it wasn't. But they were trying to be very circumspect because they didn't know who was listening. Now, they were trying to disguise their conversation as a buyer and a seller of farm goods. Now, Collivett probably knew what farm goods were. Pearse probably had no idea. So it must have been a great conversation, and it sure would have confused the heck out of any British spy because they wouldn't have any idea what was going on. But word of that did get back to Eoin MacNeill. This is again, right there in the week, Holy Week before Easter, all these little things come back to him, and this is one of the things where he started saying, hey, is there something going on here that I should be aware of? Actually, I'm the commander, the officer in charge of the volunteers. And then they lied to him. They said, nope, there's nothing going on. And then they finally came up and said, yes, there is, but you can't do anything about it. It's far too late. Then later on in the week, as we said earlier, the odd comes in and they have that sort of a problem. If you go this way on Amiens Street, you go to 55. 55 is now a Lithuanian goods store. 55 was Tom Clarke's first newsagent shop. And in 77 at the corner was his second newsagent shop. And they lived upstairs before they did move to Richmond Avenue. It's perfect. Tom Clarke was sent here by the Clan na Gael with Clan na Gael funds He was sent here with the intention to revitalize the IRB and its physical force. It always was. That was his intent. But what's more perfect than a newsagent shop? More perfect than a pub. You got people conspiring in the corner of a pub all the time. Somebody walks in, gets a newspaper, there's a little message for him on the inside of it, he walks out. Somebody walks in, gets a packet of cigarettes, little message in there, he walks out. Somebody standing in the shop all day long watching, a British tout, going to be very, very apparent to everybody. Perfect. It wasn't as though this was done in any way, by haphazard manner. He did it in a very, very good fashion. And then, of course, he moved another shop over to 75A Parnell Street, which is just about at the corner of, which is now Parnell Street. At that time it was Great Britain Street, and O'Connell Street. These names changed. What I try and do, at least in the book, is give you all the names changes so you can see where these people were and what they did. This was a very, very important area for them. And as I say, when you take a look at this, you can find out what they did.